This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into something that sounds academic, maybe, but trust me, it's got all the drama of a really long, really intense family feud. We're looking at the history of Western philosophy, but through this specific lens. The idea that basically 2,000 years of thinking, especially about the big questions, comes down to one core rivalry: master versus disciple, Plato versus Aristotle.
Yeah, and our mission here is to unpack how that specific Greek philosophical fight ended up becoming like the intellectual architecture for both Christianity and Islam.
Yeah.
And maybe even more surprising, why reason became the weapon of choice on all sides. It's kind of wild how these two long-dead Greeks framed how we even think about God.
It really is. And that core idea, the structure of Plato pushing for this transcendent ideal world versus Aristotle focusing on the order within this world. It's not just ancient history, it becomes the blueprint, you could say, for so many later conflicts. Faith versus science, mysticism versus logic.
And even, as we'll see, the huge split between Catholic and Protestant ways of thinking. It's like the source code. Okay, so let's dig in.
Right. So where do we start? I guess the surprising thing is, for all their differences, Plato doing these dialogues, Aristotle out there cataloging animals, the sources show, they actually shared a fundamental picture of the universe. They weren't starting from completely different places.
Exactly, that's crucial. Both of them basically saw the cosmos in two layers. You've got an upper world, that's where the essence is, the true form, the ultimate cause, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
And then there's a lower world, that's our world. The physical stuff, the phenomena, the results, the things we can actually touch and see. So the layers themselves, both agreed on that basic map.
So it wasn't what the layers were, but where the importance lies, where the value is.
Precisely. Where do you direct your attention, your focus?
Yeah.
For Plato, the direction, the vector, was clearly the upward ascent. He looked at our world, this world of change and decay, and, frankly, imperfection.
Yeah, not a fan.
Not really. He saw it negatively. It was incomplete, just an imitation. His word was mimesis, of that perfect world above. The famous cave analogy, right? We're just seeing shadows.
The shadows aren't the real deal.
They're not the true real. So for Plato, the whole point of reason, of philosophy, is to use that upward ascent, that rational climb, to get back to the perfect world of ideas. That's where truth is. Value is absolutely above, it's transcendent.
And Aristotle, his student, who's like literally counting fish legs,
Right.
he looks at this and says, maybe not. He rejects that whole separate world of ideas, doesn't he?
He completely flips the script. He reverses the value vector. Yeah. Aristotle's direction is inward exploration. He argues that the form, the eidos, isn't floating out there somewhere else. No, it's right here, inside the individual things we see.
So the treeness is in the tree.
Exactly. It's inherent, embedded. So reason's job, wholly different. It's about observing, analyzing, classifying the world we actually live in. Look inward to find the order that's already present in material reality. The value is placed within. It's immanent.
That's such a clear split. And it's not just abstract philosophy, is it? It dictates how you approach everything. Are you always looking up, trying to escape this world for a perfect one? Or are you digging into the details of this world to understand its rules?
And you see it immediately in their methods. Plato writes dialogues. It's this dynamic back and forth question, answer, challenge. It reflects that soul's journey, that upward struggle. It's reasoning as a kind of unfolding drama. Aristotle, he's Mr. Systematic. He gives us propositional logic, the syllogism, premise, conclusion. It's the grammar of reason, focused on the structure of arguments about the world he's observing. Both rational, absolutely, but pointing reason in opposite directions.
Okay, this is the crucial pivot point. How do these two guys living in ancient Greece with, Zeus and Apollo and gods throwing lightning bolts, how do they lay the groundwork for one god, for monotheism?
Well, that's the amazing thought revolution the Greeks really kicked off. Even before Plato and Aristotle, thinkers like Thales were asking, what's the arche? What's the single underlying principle behind all this chaos, behind all the different gods? They were searching for rational unity, not necessarily religious unity at first.
The unifying principle.
Yes. And Plato and Aristotle each offered a powerful concept of the one. For Plato, it's the idea of the good that sits at the very top of his world of ideas. It illuminates everything else, like the sun. It gives other ideas their existence and makes it possible for us to know them.
Like a light source.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A single ultimate source. It's the perfect philosophical prototype for a transcendent monotheism. A God that's pure light, pure ideal, something we strive towards.
But it doesn't really do much, the idea of the good.
Yeah.
It just is. It shines.
Pretty much. It's an ideal, not really an active agent. Aristotle's one is if anything, even more abstract, more purely rational. He gives us the first cause, or the unmoved mover.
Right.
And his famous definition for it is noesis, noeseos.
Which means thought thinking itself.
Okay, that sounds about as impersonal as you can get. It's just pure thought contemplating itself.
It is. It's a logical necessity. This first cause is completely static, eternal, perfect. It doesn't like personally create the world. But all the motion, all the change in the universe happens because everything aspires towards its perfection. It's the ultimate object of desire, pulling everything towards it without moving itself.
Wow.
So this provides the prototype for a completely philosophical monotheism, a God defined by pure reason and logical necessity.
So basically, long before Christianity and Islam really codified their doctrines, Plato and Aristotle had built these incredibly sophisticated intellectual frameworks for thinking about a single ultimate reality. They built the stadiums, you might say.
That's a good way to put it.
And then the major religions moved in and started playing the game, filling those Greek structures with their specific revelations and beliefs. And that's exactly when the old rivalry gets a new life. Because the fate of these two competing ideas, transcendent ideal versus immanent logic, they took very different paths after the classical world faded. The philosophical rivals essentially got rehired by the new powers in town.
Okay, let's trace that split. The sources use this counselor guardman metaphor. Where did Plato end up first?
Plato went west. His ideas especially filtered through later thinkers called the Neoplatonists. Plotinus is a big name. They were picked up big time by St. Augustine in the 4th and 5th centuries. Plato effectively became the counselor for early Christian theology, particularly its more mystical side.
Why was he a good fit? A good counselor?
Well, Augustine needed a system to explain the soul's journey, sin, salvation, illumination. How does the soul get back to God? Plato's framework was perfect, those transcendent ideas. Easy to reinterpret them as the eternal patterns or prototypes in the mind of God the Creator. So Augustine used that Platonic structure. The flawed lower world, the perfect upper world, the ascent of the soul through divine grace and illumination to build his theology. In this phase, reason helps faith. It points the way up. Plato provided the metaphysics for a personal transcendent God.
Okay, so Plato's in the West counseling the early church. Meanwhile, Aristotle's texts are taking a very different journey.
A completely different route. Aristotle's works, his logic, his metaphysics, his physics, biology, everything were preserved first in the Byzantine East. But then they were really embraced and massively developed during the Islamic Golden Age. Thinkers like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, who you probably know as Ibn Sina and later Averroes or Ibn Rushd,
Right.
they took Aristotle's incredibly detailed system and synthesized it with the Quran and Islamic revelation. Here, Aristotle becomes less the mystical counselor and more the intellectual guardman, the warrior even.
A guardman? Why a guardman? What's that mean?
Because Aristotle provided the tools for defense and systemization. When you're building a massive religious and political structure like the Caliphates, you need logic. You need categories. You need to define God's attributes precisely, defend the faith against challenges.
You need arguments, proofs.
Exactly. Avicenna, for instance, famously used Aristotle's logic to develop proofs for God's existence, defining God as the necessary existence. It's a highly rational philosophical defense. Aristotle provided the rigorous framework to define and defend God's unity in nature.
And Averroes, his commentaries were hugely influential, weren't they?
Immensely. He became known in the West simply as the commentator. His detailed, rigorous analysis of Aristotle became the standard for philosophical and scientific thought across the Islamic world, and eventually back in Europe too. So you have these two massive streams flowing. West, leaning Platonic, mystical, Augustinian. East, leaning Aristotelian, rational, shaped by Islamic philosophy.
But the story doesn't end there. The feud wasn't over. It was about to explode inside Europe itself.
Yes, the great reversal. The reverse flow, as you called it. Aristotle comes storming back into Latin Europe, mainly between the 11th and 13th centuries. The key mechanism here was the translation movement. Think places like Toledo in Spain, where Christian, Jewish, and Muslim scholars were working together.
And they weren't just translating dusty old Greek scrolls, right?
No, and this is the crucial part. People like Gerard of Cremona weren't just translating Aristotle directly from Greek, although some of that happened too. They were translating the Arabic versions. And those versions came bundled with centuries of brilliant commentary, additions, and systematization from the Islamic philosophers like Avicenna and Averroes.
So Europe wasn't just getting Aristotle, it was getting Aristotle supercharged with Islamic rationalism and science.
Exactly. It was a tidal wave of sophisticated logic, metaphysics, medicine, astronomy, the complete rational system for understanding the world. And for a Europe still largely running on the Augustinian Platonic model, where faith was firmly in the driver's seat and reason was, helpful but secondary, this was a shock.
I can imagine. Suddenly, here's this comprehensive system explaining everything through observation and logic. And Averroes, the commentator, his stuff must have seemed particularly radical, almost threatening.
Deeply threatening to some. His rigorous logic, sometimes seeming to suggest reason could operate independently of faith, caused huge controversy. This sets the stage for scholasticism. This is the moment of that intellectual collision right inside European universities.
And the giant figure here is Thomas Aquinas.
Aquinas, his life's work, really, was this monumental task of reconciliation. How do you take the existing Platonic Augustinian foundation of the Church and integrate this incredibly powerful, persuasive Aristotelian system that just arrived?
He tried to make them work together.
He did. He essentially upgraded reason. It wasn't just fate's handmaiden anymore, like in the old Augustinian view. For Aquinas, reason became faith's colleague. He argued that since both reason, studying God's creation, and revelation, studying God's word, come from the same divine source, they cannot ultimately contradict each other. His synthesis, harmonizing Aristotle with Christianity, became the bedrock of Catholic theology for centuries.
That synthesis, that peace treaty, didn't last forever, because the sources point to the Reformation in the 16th century as the ultimate proxy war. The master versus disciple fight flares up again massively.
It really does. You can absolutely read the Reformation, intellectually speaking, as a powerful backlash against the Aristotelian synthesis that Aquinas had built. Catholicism largely stuck with Aquinas' reason and faith working together, the whole logical structure.
Okay.
But Protestantism, think Luther, think Calvin, they launched a frontal assault on what they saw as sterile, overly rational scholastic theology. Their rallying cry was solidified faith alone.
And philosophically, what does faith alone mean in this context?
It means a decisive swing back towards the Platonic transcendent model. Luther and Calvin were essentially saying, you can't capture God in your neat Aristotelian logical boxes. God's grace, God's revelation, his majesty, it utterly transcends human reason. Reason is fallen, weak.
So they rejected the guardman, Aristotle's logic.
Totally. And they doubled down on the counselor model, maybe? The idea of direct illumination, the soul's absolute dependence on a God who is fundamentally beyond rational comprehension. It was a rejection of the immanent, ordered, rational approach in favor of the transcendent, overwhelming mystery.
So this argument, this pendulum swing between Plato and Aristotle just keeps echoing down through the centuries. Is the ultimate truth, the absolute, somewhere above us in a perfect realm we aspire to? That's Plato. Or is it within the world we see, touch, and analyze? That's Aristotle.
That really is the fundamental tension that drove so much Western thought. And as the sources hint, maybe this very feud, this constant back and forth trying to locate the absolute either up there or down here, eventually kind of exhausted itself. You get later thinkers, Descartes, Kant, Hegel, trying to find a new basis for reason, maybe a neutral one. But ultimately, the inability to definitively settle the Plato-Aristotle question paved the way for Nietzsche to come along and say, you know what, maybe the absolute in either form is just dead.
Right, the death of God or the death of the ultimate grounding principle.
Yeah. And if their whole grand narrative of Western philosophy has been, in a way, this long argument about whether to take the upward ascent like Plato or the inward exploration like Aristotle, and if we've now sort of declared that the destination that we're both searching for, the absolute, isn't really on the map anymore.
Right.
Well, that leaves us with a pretty big question, doesn't it?
Which is,
where does the modern search for purpose, for meaning, for that one principle that orders things, where does it even look now? If we've given up on the transcendent ideal above us, and we're skeptical about finding inherent absolute order within the world, is the whole search now just turned completely inward? Is it only about human consciousness, human existence, making meaning for ourselves alone?
wow, okay, that's definitely something to chew on. The huge question hanging there. Thanks for guiding us through that epic view.
My pleasure. It's a story that just keeps on giving.
It certainly seems so. That's all we have time for on this deep dive. Join us next time.
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.